The mic was still warm in my hand when my dad's voice cut through the wedding chatter, calling me a failure, Holden Vance, 55, chief engineer, feeling the ballroom's air conditioning bite while my Seiko military watch ticked steady on my wrist. Ever had a moment when family pride and public shame collided? The summer of 2017 came in thick as a wool blanket, humid enough that even the flags outside the VFW hall looked tired. Paper lanterns bobbed from a length of twine strung between two pecan trees. Someone had layered the folding tables with red and white checkered cloths. Condensation pooled under sweet tea glasses, making little halos on the vinyl. If you stood still long enough, the smell of charcoal would slide off the grills and mix with the salt off the river. I remember thinking it smelled like a childhood afternoon that had learned too much about adult things. I'd worn my old Seiko that day, the one my father gave me when I was 13. The crystal was scuffed smooth as a river stone, but it ticked like an honest metronome. I check it more than most people check their phones, not because I'm anxious, but because once, just once, being on time earned me a fraction of my father's attention. That was 1982 in our garage heat, pressing down through a tin roof, while dust hung in the air like slow snow. I stood in front of his workbench, trying to keep my feet out of the oil spill he never cleaned. Dad set the watch in my palm as if it were a wrench, not a gift. "Being on time is how you respect other people," he said, though his eyes stayed on the line of screwdrivers at the back of the bench. I licked my lips, twisted the crown, and set the minute hand to match the kitchen clock I could just see through the doorway. When I pushed the crown in, the second hand took off steady as a marching band. He gave the smallest nod. If I'd blinked, I might have missed it. I didn't blink. Memory does this trick, sometimes folds itself like a map so far off town's touch. I was standing at the barbecue 4 decades later and could still feel the tacky grip of that rubber watch strap against teenage skin. I could still hear the creak of the garage door on its rollers, still see Maribel's knees chalky from kneeling on the driveway drawing a hopscotch grid. Back then she was 11 and trying to learn When the Saints Go Marching In on a plastic cornet, puffing so hard her cheeks went round. Now she was 36, a music teacher with a laugh you could recognize across a crowded gym, and she'd talked me into coming to this thing because it would be good for Dad. I didn't ask good for him in what way. Inside the hall, veterans' caps sat on the table like little blue ships. Out back, the grill master in an apron that read, "Kiss the cook if you dare," wielded tongs like he was conducting an orchestra. My mother, Junia, made gentle circuits with a tray of sliced watermelon, tucking stray hair behind her ear, and apologizing to people for everything the way she does when she's trying to keep a day nice. Strangers had a way of telling her their long stories, and then sighing in relief like she'd just opened a window. I hugged Maribel first. She hit me with the full wattage of her smile and a plastic fork. "Eat," she ordered. "You look like you've been living on coffee and bolts." "Bolts are rich in iron," I said. "Doctor's orders." She rolled her eyes and looped her arm through mine. 2 weeks, she said, meaning the wedding. "You'd better have something nice to say. I'll keep it short. Short I can live with. Nice is mandatory." My father arrived later than he said he would, which is a particular kind of joke I've never found funny. He walked like a man who has always known where the door is, straight back, chin up, the old Navy hitch in his hips, the smirk small and permanent like the face had settled around it years ago and forgot how to do anything else. He nodded to a handful of acquaintances with that air that suggests he's remembered their names even if he hasn't. When he got to me, he gave my shoulder a pat that was 3/4 rebuke and 1/4 approval, and somehow both parts stung. "How's the shipyard?" he asked, already half turned to someone else. Busy, I said. We took delivery of a patrol hull last week. Refit's going quick. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if you were feeling generous. Everything's quick until it isn't. I decided to be generous. You have to pick something to be religious about, and I've chosen restraint. People drifted over in ones and twos, neighbors I hadn't seen since I was running cross-country, a mechanic who used to loan me socket sets, a man with a white mustache who'd won state for his ribs 3 years running. They asked what I did at the yard, and I told them the truth. I lead a team of engineers. We plan, we solve, we argue, we measure twice, and then once more for luck. It's not glamorous. It's not supposed to be. You only notice us when something we did holds. A woman in a sun hat said her nephew wanted to study mechanical engineering, and did I have any advice, I started with the usual. Get good at the basics. Be suspicious of your own certainty, when Dad's voice rose from behind me, bright as a whistle. He only tightens bolts, he said. For fun. It takes less than a second for words like that to find every ear they're meant to. Laughter that wasn't really laughter tipped over from a nearby table and fell quiet. I could feel the sun choose that moment to come out from behind a cloud and heat the back of my neck. The watch ticked a small insect in a jar. In the instant after I had the impulse to perform a dozen different surgeries on the situation, correct the record with a tidy explanation, crack a joke so clean no one would know I'd bled for it, remind him of my title in a voice just shy of pride. Every option sounded like petitioning. I have learned through trial and error and a great deal of silence that petitioning doesn't work with men who enjoy the withholding. I put down the fork. Let me help with the grill, I said to no one in particular and to everyone at once. Maribel's fingers found my forearm a little squeeze of apology that was not hers to give. Mom intercepted a man on his way to clap my father on the back and sent him toward the lemonade instead. The cook handed me a brush for the sauce. We stood shoulder to shoulder, painting ribs like we were varnishing a skiff. There are questions in smoke that never find words. Dad eased himself into a lawn chair not 10 yards away. He leaned back, crossed an ankle over a knee, and studied the sky as if he'd ordered it. An old friend said something low. Dad answered with a shrug, the kind that says both. What can you do and see what I mean? I glanced over and found him already looking at me. Not angry. Not anything, really. A man oversees his field and notes the weather. I held his gaze for a heartbeat, then 2. The sauce brush dripped a red comet onto the grass. One of the kids who'd been chasing bubbles ran too close to the grill, and the cook snapped, "Hey now," in a voice gentle enough to be love. Some radio put on a song from 1979, and a trio of women sang harmony without meaning to. The river kept breathing. The heat crawled into the shade and sat down. I checked my watch again, on the minute as ever. It did what it was made to do, and so did I. There's a quiet pride in that, even when no one claps. I didn't go over to him. I didn't explain the math behind a stress diagram, or the way a hull hums when you've gotten the tolerances exactly right. I didn't list the names of ships I'd shepherded from blueprint to water, or the nights I'd slept on a cot at the yard with a wrench under my pillow because a pump had to work by dawn. I let the words lie there on the grass where he'd dropped them and went on brushing socks. Later, after the sun folded itself into the tree line and the lanterns came on like a second constellation, I took a slow walk around the edge of the park. The cicadas were loud enough to make you shout if you wanted to be heard, which was a mercy. Nobody expects revelations when the bugs are singing. I watched my father from a distance, saw him tip his head toward a story that must have been good, saw the smirk get a little deeper. When he finally stood up, his knee popped like a knuckle. For some reason, that sound made me sadder than anything he'd said. Maribel caught up with me. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "I just need to check the time." She laughed because it was the kind of thing big brothers say when they don't want to explain themselves. I looked at the Seiko and thought about how a watch tells you two truths: where you are in the day and how long you've been waiting. If you're not careful, you confuse the second for patience. I headed back toward the grills past a table where veterans had lined up their caps like a parade at rest. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped. I didn't look. I had ribs to turn a mother to help pack ice into coolers, a sister to drive home. I didn't know it then, but that would be the opening note to a long, familiar song. July pressed down like a wet palm. By noon, the dry dock had turned into a heat sink, the steel around us radiating yesterday's sun back into our shins. Grinders screamed against welds. A crane swung a length of pipe slow as a grandfather clock pendulum, and every time its hook creaked, 3 men looked up in the same practiced way. I walked the catwalk with a clipboard tucked under my arm out of pure habit. Nobody uses paper anymore, but the weight steadies me the way sailors keep an old coin in a pocket. 2 degrees port on frame 30. I called, and the foreman raised a gloved hand without looking, the grinder's sparks spraying orange at his boots. The patrol hull below us was a patient we'd opened along the seam pumps. Stripped ribs bared the kind of job you do with both a torque wrench and a prayer. My shirt stuck to my back. Someone's radio wedged in a toolbox was playing a hymn in static. At the far end of the dock, a young tech waved a question I could answer with a nod. That's most of the work: showing up, pointing, trusting the hands you've trained to do what they know. My father used to say leadership is a posture. He meant it like a warning. I took it like a lesson anyway. By 5, the light turned the river pewter. The day shift signed the board and peeled off toward home. I stayed to walk the perimeter one more time. There's a sound a hull makes when it's finally right, an almost silent reassurance you feel in your palms. I waited for that murmur and didn't hear it yet. Tomorrow. My phone buzzed. "You alive," Maribel said when I picked up. I could hear the echo of the school gym behind her, and someone attempting trumpet scales with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "Alive," I said. "Marginally elegant. Good. I'm calling in my favor." Chairs scraped somewhere near her. "I want you to do the toast." "I thought you hired a comedian?" "I did. He's called Colden Vance, and he owes me for the time I soldered a clarinet key with your soldering iron, and you didn't tell Dad. I remember that. The iron still smells like band room." She laughed, then softer. "You'll keep it short, but you'll say what matters. You always do." I looked down at my hands. Half-moons of grit had settled in the cuticles. "All right," I said. "Short and true. And nice," she added. Rourke's mother cries easily. "Nice," I said, like I was agreeing to share a lifeboat. How is Rourke polite to a fault? He salutes the principal when he drops off coffee. "Good reflexes," I said. "We'll need those." We hung up, and I sat on a coil of rope, waiting for the foreman to sign off his last checklist. When the dry dock was quiet enough that I could hear my own breath, I unfolded a blueprint I'd flattened and re-flattened all week. The decommissioned destroyer at the old pier, her lines a language only shipyard rats and romantics care to read. The city had been making noises for years about cutting her loose and letting her rust herself to sleep. A handful of us had other plans. We'd drafted a preservation proposal, modest as these things go. Stabilize the hull open weekends, school tours, a living piece of the river's memory. We needed faces for a board. We needed a name people still believed when he spoke it. Against my better judgment, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, a small mercy that made me brace. Yes, Dad. I'm putting a board together for the destroyer. Preservation, not politics. We'd like you on it. A pause. I could hear the scrape of a chair, maybe the ring of a spoon against china. Mind your own work, he said, and ended the call as if he were flicking a crumb off a table. There are things you can do with anger, throw it, drink it, aim it at the nearest mirror. I put mine in my pocket with the watch and gave it time. The Seiko's second hand clicked on untroubled. I rolled the blueprint and held it a moment against my sternum before tucking it back into its tube. I walked home along the water, the fan blades in my apartment already clucking to themselves in the stale air when I opened the door. I left my boots by the mat and stood in front of the window unit until it decided to remember how to be cold. The place smells like machine oil no matter what candles I buy. It's in the clothes, in the lines of my palms, probably in the way I sleep. I don't mind. Some men are made of wood and some of brass. I'm trying to be the kind that doesn't corrode. The laptop hummed itself awake. I clicked through work emails, deliveries, a revised spec, a polite reminder that safety trainings are not optional, and then the personal folder I pretend not to keep organized. One new message sat there with a subject line that looked like a shrug. From Lemuel Vance to Colden Vance. Subject RSVP body. Yes. No punctuation. No we're proud, no looking forward. Just the word like a stamped form. I stared at it long enough that the screen dimmed and threw my reflection back at me. Sweat salted a smear of grease at the jawline. I wiped it with the heel of my hand and laughed once, the kind that sounds like you've stubbed a toe in church. I took the tube with the destroyer's plans to the kitchen table and unrolled it. The paper had a memory. It fought the flatness and curled back up at the edges until I weighted the corners with whatever was handy, salt shaker or wrench, a paperback I hadn't finished. Pencil in hand, I traced the line of the keel like a road map to a town I'd left and kept returning to. If I was going to go begging for volunteers for grant money for one more year before the river took her back, then the ask would be clean and honest. No petitions in the direction of a man who enjoyed saying no. My phone pinged again. Maribel, a flurry of confetti emojis, and then we got final numbers from the hotel. Also, guess whose name is on the guest list now? Rourke's mother, I typed. The principal. The trumpet section. You're hilarious, she wrote. Admiral Silas Corwin will be there. I read it twice. The fan clicked overhead as if agreeing. I knew the name from shipyard lore and a half-dozen after-action reports I'd studied for fun on nights I couldn't sleep. Corwin was one of those officers the crews still spoke about like a weather event, steady, inevitable, the kind that moved people into their proper places just by walking into a room. Copy, I sent back. I'll keep it short. And nice. Promise? She asked. On my watch, I wrote and then winced at my own joke. The Seiko ticked on, indifferent to my wordplay, counting out a summer that felt both overdue and right on time. Outside, somewhere along the river, a barge sounded a long, low note, and the apartment's thin windows gathered it in like a reminder. I set my phone face down on the blueprint and stared at my father's email again. In its way, the one-word reply helped. Yes meant he'd be in the room. Yes meant I could stop wondering about the entrance and plan for the weather it would bring. That's what engineers do, we design for the load we know is coming. The fan rattled, then settled. The ice in my glass sighed. I turned off the laptop, and the room slipped back into the quiet of machines cooling. In the dark screen, I could make out my outline older than I imagine until I catch it in glass still upright. It would have to be enough. The wedding clock was running. My job, as always, would be to show up when the minute hand landed, set my shoulders and speak like the room was built to hear me. The phone buzzed once more on the table, scooting itself an inch across the blueprint. Maribel again. P.S. Admiral Silas Corwin will be there. The Harborview Diner had a way of smelling like it had been making bacon since the Eisenhower years. The doorbell went off when I pushed in a tired ding that nobody inside acknowledged. Sun came in hard off the river, turned the Formica tables into light boxes, and made the chrome napkin dispensers blink like they had thoughts. A pair of gulls were posted on the sill outside the window, tapping with their beaks when the waitress set down plates the way some men clear their throats before speaking. I took the booth by the window, the one where the cushion had a split that pinched if you sat wrong. The coffee was dark enough to see my face in it. My reflection looked like a man who'd been up late deciding whether to sand a rough edge or live with it. The cup left a ring on the checkered paper placemat when I lifted it a little planet, where I kept orbiting the same idea, say, less stand straighter. He arrived without ceremony, like a tide change. Gray suit, nothing fancy, a tie that had known better days but still did its job. He carried himself the way a well-built hull sits in water, even unapologetic, made for work. I stood, and he shook my hand with one of those dry, exact grips that tells you everything you need to know. "Colden," he said, as if we'd just stepped out of the same hatch. "Silas Corwin. Thank you for meeting me," I said. "I was hungry," he said, sliding in. "Hunger is a good reason to do most things." The waitress knew his order. He asked after her mother like it was a habit, and she answered with the same brevity which felt like affection. When she left us, he glanced at my hands. Grease leaves a faint tattoo under the nails, no matter how much you scrub. I tucked my thumbs out of sight and then put them back on the table, because hiding isn't a posture I want to practice. We started where men like us always start, with the shipyard. He knew names I hadn't heard in 15 years, and remembered who had a temper who could weld upside down, who never graduated from coffee to water, no matter the heat. I told him about the patrol hull we were coaxing back into something seaworthy, about the day shift kid with the good eye for plumb, about the foreman who could listen to a pump and tell you which gasket was lying. He smiled at that and said, "Pumps are liars by trade." He asked how I slept. I said like a man who counts instead of dreams. He nodded. He knew the math. The plates arrived eggs over easy for him, a BLT for me because I'd been smelling bacon for 10 minutes, and life is short. He ate the way men who have been hungry eat, efficiently with gratitude but no commentary. After a while, he set down his fork and used the edge of his knife to pull a coffee cup ring toward him, tracing it like a compass rose. "I know about your father," he said. I didn't ask how. Newport News is a small town if you count it by the number of people who know where the shipyard gates are. He enjoys an audience, I said. I try not to give him one. He looked out the window where the gulls had abandoned us for a truck unloading cases of soda. "My review board 93, he said. A commander who disliked me on principle had saved a small speech in his pocket. He delivered it with care. I expected to argue. I had a binder as thick as a hymnal. "How'd it go?" "I closed the binder," he said. I stood at parade rest and did not blink. We sat with that a second. He let the hum of the diner fill the space, the sizzle behind the counter, the swing of the kitchen door, the shuffle of an old man doing the crossword, 1 letter per breath. His silence wasn't dramatic. It was the kind that asks the room to choose its own volume. They asked if I had a response, he said. I said, No words, sir. The board chair looked down the table like he was taking attendance, and then said, Noted. Then he asked the others if they had questions. Nobody did. I smiled without showing teeth. That worked. Sometimes, he said, spearing a last piece of yolk with toast, the room wants to be told what it already knows. Talking can get in the way. I thought about the barbecue, about how my father's sentence had traveled across the folding tables like a breeze that doesn't cool anything. He is very good at making me want to explain, I said. Explanations are expensive, Silas said. You pay in dignity and time. The return on investment is poor. He said it like he was reading instructions, not handing out wisdom, which made me trust it more. He folded his paper napkin with 2 fingers. You have a sister getting married, he said. It wasn't a question. In 2 weeks, I said. She wants me to say something. I will say something. You will, he said. He tapped the coffee ring again, then wiped it away with his thumb. There might be other ways to say it. Across the diner, the radio settled on a station from the decade we were both starting careers. A guitar arpeggio I hadn't heard since the Clinton administration threaded through the eggs and the fry oil and the coffee steam and made the room feel briefly like a place I could live inside. I took a bite of sandwich to give my brain a reason to be quiet. Do you know Admiral Ross? He asked, casual as a weather report. I know of him, I said. Men like me tend to learn the names of men like that. Silas nodded. He will be at the wedding. He let that hang without commentary like a piece of rigging set down for later. He is a decent man. He remembers what respect looks like. I considered my coffee. The mug had a chip that someone had painted over with clear lacquer so the lip wouldn't cut you. What does respect look like? I asked, because sometimes you need the obvious on paper. He looked at me as if I'd asked what water was. Attention, he said. And then, when it's right, silence. The gulls returned to the sill and pecked at a smear of something shiny, tapping the glass with quick, hollow knocks. He and I watched them work. A freight train went by behind the diner, slow enough to read the stenciled warnings, and each car seemed to carry an idea with it. Weight, momentum, timing. My father is a man who enjoys withholding, I said. He considers it a virtue. That's a kind of weather, Silas said. You don't argue with barometric pressure. You dress for it. I laughed, which felt like letting air into a sealed compartment. I can't fix him. Correct, he said. And you cannot fix a room by scolding it either. But you can sometimes make a room remember itself. He told me the rest of the review board story in 2 sentences, the way the chair had cleared his throat before announcing the outcome, the rustle of uniforms, the exact sensation of the carpet under his shoes as he stood to leave. He didn't give me adjectives. He gave me nouns and temperature and the distance between a door and a man when dignity is the only luggage you carry. You don't always need words for people to know exactly where you stand, he said finally. I felt something shift. Not a thunderclap, more like when a hull settles into true and the vibration leaves your bones. He held my eyes across the table long enough for the waitress to come by and ask if we wanted pie. He didn't blink. Sometimes he said the salute says more than the speech. The line hit the table between us and sat there clean and sharp. I could see all at once how the room might tilt without anyone raising a voice, how the air might change temperature if the right person stood at the right time, how silence might be the loudest sound. The idea didn't arrive like a plan. It arrived like a picture. A ballroom, the hum of a band giving way to stillness, the scrape of chairs, the quick collective inhale. We paid. He left too much cash under his cup and slid out of the booth without checking whether I was following. At the door, he put a hand to the jamb like a sailor testing the sea, and looked back just once. "Short and true," he said. "That's enough." Outside, the gulls lost interest in us and arrowed toward the ferry wake. The river carried a breeze that made the diner's metal sign ping against its chain. I stood there a moment with the taste of coffee and salt in my mouth and let the picture in my head sharpen me. Not saying much. A room, deciding for itself. A gesture that didn't ask permission because it didn't need to. When I walked back toward the yard, the sun had shifted, and the cranes drew long shadows like clock hands across the asphalt. I checked my watch without thinking. It kept perfect time, steady as breath. Somewhere between the diner door and the corner where the street slopes to the river, an idea set its foundation. Not a speech. Not an explanation. Something you could see from the back of the room and feel in your feet. The Naval Heritage Fair always smelled like a contradiction: kettle corn sugar and diesel sea salt and hot dogs, old rope and new lacquer. By 10 a.m., the pier was ribbed with white tents, each one snapping as the river breathed. Retired sailors stood behind tables of brass fittings polished within an inch of their lives. A high school jazz trio worked through autumn leaves with more zeal than timing. A pair of toddlers in paper sailor caps took turns falling down with the moral courage of drunks. It was supposed to be a good day. I had even worn a clean shirt and the watch. Our booth faced the water. I'd pinned up diagrams the way a person pins up hopes, cross-sections of hulls, exploded views of pumps, a line drawing of the destroyer we were trying to save, with red pencil notes that made it look like a prayer. Visitors came in waves, a grandfather who wanted to tell me about a ship that isn't here anymore. A teenager who said he liked math except when it had letters in it. A woman who kept asking what color the boat would be when it was done, as if paint were the story. I did what I always do. I translated pounds to feelings, tolerances to trust. I showed a couple how the skin of a ship is not the point. How what matters is the unseen lattice that keeps her honest against a sea that doesn't care. Every time someone nodded like they'd felt that truth somewhere in their own body, the day lifted a little. The PA system coughed every half hour, and a volunteer announced raffle numbers into a microphone that didn't so much amplify as argue. Winning ticket holders lifted their hands uncertainly like students in a class where the teacher keeps changing the question. Around noon, I saw Ken threading toward me between strollers and a man in a kilt. He's a machinist with a careful heart, the kind who leaves notes on the drill press for the night shift about little things he's already fixed. He doesn't hurry unless something is bleeding. Today he was moving quickly and pretending not to. "Got a minute?" he asked, not quite looking at me. "For you," I said. "Two." He glanced at the river, then back. "Your dad's here," he said, as if maybe I hadn't expected gravity. I kept my face where I'd left it. "All right." He stopped by the demonstration table, Ken said. "You know where they're showing the pump cross-section? A couple of the coasties were asking who's running the refit at our yard. Somebody said your name." Ken scratched the side of his jaw, a motion that looked like he'd much rather scratch the whole world. "He told them you mostly fix engines for show. For show. It's a tiny phrase, cheap as pocket lint. It still knows how to fit itself into the parts of you that aren't armored." The kettle corn smell got suddenly louder. The music went thin. I wanted to ask Ken what tone my father had used, whether anyone laughed, whether anyone corrected him. I also didn't want to know anything. The watch on my wrist felt heavier. I lifted it to check the time and thumbed the crown as if I could rewind the minute. The metal was slick with sweat. Or maybe my fingers forgot their job for 1 second. Either way, the watch slipped. Time is supposed to be silent, but when it hit the pier, it made a sound I'll hear in my ribs forever, a bright, surprised crack that seemed unreasonably cheerful about breaking. I crouched by reflex. The crowd thickened and thinned around me, a human tide that didn't care what I'd dropped. The crystal had split a vein of lightning running from one edge to the other. A sliver of glass sat loose like a tooth that's given up. Sunlight found the fracture and turned it into a river map. I pressed my thumb to the crown again. The second hand kept going neat as a metronome, even though the skin of the thing was hurt. "You okay?" Ken asked, because he's a man who can ask a real question in public without sounding like he's showing off. "I am now," I said, and didn't know whether it was true. He hovered like he wanted to offer help, and also knew there wasn't any. "Want me to find him?" he asked. No. I cupped the watch gentle as an egg and stood. A child nearby shouted that he'd won a plastic anchor keychain. The PA announced numbers that no one could hear, and then announced them again louder and less intelligible. Somewhere a generator coughed into life and made the tent ropes shiver. I slipped the watch into my pocket. The cracked glass kissed the fabric with a scratch I'd feel later when I took the thing out and found threads snagged. My phone was in the other pocket. There's a message you can compose in under a breath when a decision has already been made. I texted Silas, "I think it's time." The bubble that means someone is typing stopped and started again. Those 3 dots have humiliated better men than me. They are proof that we've given suspense to a machine. I watched them the way you watch a pot boil when what you really want is the kettle to sing. "Ready," he wrote. No flourish, no counsel, no sermon. Ready. One word can feel like a door being unlocked from the other side. I put the phone away and found the gesture my body knows when I've burned a finger and don't want to make a fuss, the small shake like you're dismissing a fly. The crack in the watch sat against my thigh. The fractured crystal itched like a stubborn truth. I could have marched across the pier and asked my father if he was tired, if this ancient ritual of diminishing me ever felt boring, if perhaps we might try being strangers for the afternoon. I could have asked him whether he understood that when you tell a room a false thing about your son, the lie holds for a while, even when the metal doesn't. I didn't. My job was to stand in a tent and explain pumps to people who love boats. His job, as he defined it, was to be weather. I can't argue with barometric pressure. I can dress for it. A teenager and his mother approached the boy awkward in a way that made me want to hand him a blueprint and a job for the rest of his life. He pointed at a cutaway and asked what the funny-looking gasket did. I told him. He nodded once seriously, as if I'd admitted him to a private club whose only rule was to keep the world from sinking. He moved on, and for a moment I had the tent to myself. I turned the easel a fraction so the destroyer drawing faced the center aisle. A breeze slid a corner of the paper up, and I pressed it back down with the tip of my finger. The graphite left a smudge on my skin. In the long, low space between the band's songs, the river made a sound like breathing. Farther down the pier, someone laughed hard at something I didn't catch. Life kept behaving like itself, which is sometimes the most beautiful and most exasperating thing. I took the watch back out careful. The crack looked like a scar you'd be proud of later after it stopped hurting. The second hand still marched. There's a particular kind of comfort to machines that keep doing their jobs after they've been insulted. I ran my thumb along the stainless edge and felt where the glass gave way to air. The day had decided for me. If a speech was called for at the wedding, I'd give one. It would be short and true, like Silas said. but the room might not remember the words. Rooms don't often. They remember how they stood. Raffle number 876, the PA blared tinny and triumphant, and a cheer went up from somewhere I couldn't see. A woman in a sun hat beamed as if she'd been waiting all morning for that moment, which she probably had. Good for her. We all like to hear a number that belongs to us. Ken returned with 2 bottles of water he pretended were for him. He handed me one and looked at my pocket like he could see through fabric. Still ticking, he asked. Still ticking, I said. He didn't press. That's a gift I've learned to count. He nodded toward the diagrams. You want a break? I can hold the fort. I'm all right, I said. Go win us a cooler. He grinned and wandered off. I adjusted the clips on the easel the way a person fusses with a cufflink before he steps into a room that wants to remind him what he's not. The destroyer on the paper looked stubborn, ready to outlive us all out of pure spite. I almost envied her. The afternoon stretched, then folded itself into shade. I answered the questions that could be answered. I let the others pass by. Under the tent, the air was a little cooler, or maybe I'd decided to forgive the heat for wanting to be everywhere at once. When I finally closed the booth for the day, I slid the cracked watch back onto my wrist. The band found the same old notch it always finds. The crystal winked like a secret. On the way to the parking lot, my phone buzzed once more. A second message from Silas, as spare as the first, I'll be there early. I slid the phone into my pocket beside the watch. They knocked together glass against glass and made a sound no one else would notice. I did. It sounded like 2 decisions agreeing. The October sky over Newport News had that washed exact blue that makes dress uniforms look carved. From the ballroom's glass wall, the James River looked flat as an ironed sheet. A pair of barges slid past like they were late for something that didn't mind. The Harborview Grand had polished every surface to within an inch of vanity. Round tables bloomed with linen. Place cards in tidy script told people where they belonged. A string quartet worked through standards without announcing itself. When the servers passed, the condensation on the water glasses trailed small comets across the white. I touched the lapel of my jacket the way a man checks his pockets before a long drive. The microphone waited on the head table, a black stem among the flowers. Maribel glowed the way some people do when they are exactly where they should be. Rourke had the posture of a man trying not to look proud of his luck and failing at it. My mother looked 10 years younger when she smiled and exactly her age when she stopped. My father sat forward in his chair, not quite at attention, with a familiarity that says the room is his, until proven otherwise. The MC read through the list, jokes the hotel prints on a card for men like him to pretend are theirs. A polite roll of laughter circled the room and came back to its seat. And now he said a few words from the bride's brother, Mr. Colden Vance. Polite applause. I stood. The microphone felt heavier than it should, like a tool you've borrowed and promised not to break. I took my place under the warm lights and looked briefly at the wall of windows. The river took my measure and offered no advice.